tree bark. Some of the trees that I like to get bark from, my favorites is a tulip poplar because the tree grows nice and straight. It has very smooth bark. Some people like elephant skin. It's a dark gray and a lighter gray mixed, kind of wrinkly. Makes great kitchen containers. Here I have a little bit of maple. It's a little bit of a thinner material, but works well. Right here I have some swamp oak. The oak has nice, strong, fun bark to work with, a little bit thicker bark. And this is some pine. I did this from a pine tree. If you can see here, this is where the branches came out. You really want to look for a nice piece of bark that has no branches, no disease spots, that is smooth and safe. There's many ways to use bark. You could strip it off and use it to weave in a basket. You could clean off the outer bark and just have the inner bark. It's like a piece of leather when it's wet, and it can fold and bend and make containers. This is cedar bark, which is a great bark to work with. It's soft, it's pliable, but it does become brittle after years of use. And then we have birch bark. Now birch bark is a great material. I have to tell you a story. I took a class one time and I made this container, and I brought home some of the birch bark, and about a year or two later I decided I wanted to make another container, so I soaked the material, soaked it for 6 hours, soaked it overnight. It still never became pliable, and then I thought, oh my goodness, that's why they make birch bark canoes out of birch bark, because it does not re-soak. Retards the water and doesn't become flexible until you have heated the bark. So you heat it over a fire or iron it to get it to be flexible and pliable to create the container. They also use bark for different types of medicines. There are barks that are edible, like slippery elm. I have chewed on white oak bark because I'm a white oak basket weaver, and it does have tannic acid in it, and it begins to get crow's feet into your eyes, so not a good idea. Okay, time now for us to go harvest some tree bark. One of the tools that I use, I use a box cutter to slice the tree bark. Many people use a big knife. I find that I have a lot of control, plus I can put the blade in and put it in my pocket safely. The other tool that I need is a spud or a pusher, and I just take a thin pencil-sized piece of wood and cut the end off of it, kind of point it. Works best if you find a dry piece of wood because it's a little stiffer than something that's green, which means it has its moisture in it. You can use it to, once you've cut the bark, spud helps you lift the bark from the tree. Here she goes. So when I tried to take the bark off of this section of this fallen white swamp tree, there wasn't enough moisture. The bark had begun to adhere to the wood. So when a tree dries out, the bark adheres. I think the core did not have the sap moving enough for us to take the bark off completely around. Okay, we're here at this fallen maple tree, and I'm going to try to take a piece out of here. I have no idea how long it's down for, but we'll give it a try. So first what you want to do is make a circle all the way around the tree. cutting through again the inner and the outer bark. Now, this is a maple tree. Maple has a very thin bark, which is good for weaving baskets. And then you want to make a circle all the way around the tree up on the bottom part. Now what I did is I looked for a nice piece. There is a little bit of a tree branch coming out here, so that might give me a little bit of a hard time. Maple is nice and smooth and flat and a good bark for that. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to make a line from the bottom up to the top. Alright, so that just making sure that it is nice and deep. So when you push in, you want to make sure that you get through the outer bark and the inner bark. Making it easier to come off. And let's hope she's ready to give you this bark. Now, again, you don't want to put your hands inside of here, because sometimes there's little nub. Of all the bark, maple is actually the smoothest and softer bark. It does take some time and some finesse. So you slide your spud back and forth, kind of pry. So right around this knot, I'm going to pry it up to make sure it's going to pull off.
Ooh, look at that piece. That's beautiful.
Take this, clean off the edges so that they're flat, with hopes that you can split it. Split a little bit there, trying to come off this end. We're splitting the outer bark from the inner bark, which the outer bark is not quite as pliable. Depends on what you're going to use your piece for. But you see, this makes it kind of a leathery, and actually there's another growth ring right there. You could split it again with that growth ring. The outside layer is nice for making baskets to weave it in. There's weavers, and this material, the inner bark, is very pliable. It's good for making containers, and you can actually take a pair of scissors and cut it out and manipulate it. Okay, so once we get our bark off of the tree, bring it back to our workstation. Depending on what you want to create with it, I'd like to do a bark container and maybe a little basket. So I'm going to look here. It's got a nice section in here to cut. Cut that off. I might use this some creative way later on. Alright, and now I'm going to square the piece up or make it have 90-degree angles. You can do this using a knife, but I like to use the scissors. Alright, to make a folded container with the bark, you want to remove, for this pine bark, you want to remove the outer bark. So I use an old knife that I have and just kind of scrape it off. If you go with the grain, of course it's going to be a little bit easier. So you want to scrape the outer bark off, and I like to leave a little, it kind of gives it a neat look, you know, with this bark here on there. But you can bring it all the way down to just inner bark if you want to. One thing I do now, this is real pliable, soft, it almost feels like leather. What I'll do is maybe roll it across just to make sure that it gets softer and kind of break any pieces that might still be difficult to bend. So for this type of container, what I did was I turned it up and do all four sides. Oh, that one cracked. You got to kind of get a feel for this material. It will crack on you, but it is also pretty pliable. And what I did was to cut along that fold. And then bring this up again. And then bring these in. Up. Bend it up. And in. You can use clothespins, but these little ones are nice and strong. Alright. So you could just put holes in there and lash it together. Or like this one, I put slices in it. I cut the end of this and slid it in, and it catches. So let's make this piece into a container like this. You want to take your knife and draw. You only want to go through the outer bark, not through the inner bark. So you need to do a very light okay, and it should be a football shape. And just cutting through the outer bark. Here and goes down to a point there and down to a point back here. And now you want to bend it so it's bend right at the football. Okay, and then you're going to just like this piece here. I cut the bottom out and sewed it on, but if you do it carefully, you won't need to do that. Here to clamp it. With your awl, you go about half an inch to an inch down and about a half an inch to an inch away from the edge, and you can put some holes in. So this is artificial sinew, and we're going to use this to sew up the side of the basket or container. And I usually take about a yard of material. And I have a sail sewing needle. My hands have pitch from the bark on them, so I'm having problems. Okay. And then you want to put a good knot on the end. This is waxed, and so it's very slippery. So you always want to tie a little more than normal with your knots so that it won't come out. Some people like to do different stitches. I like to do it so that they go straight across from each other. So you're pulling directly into each other. So I go up on the same side that I'm at right now. And then that way I have a good cross the basket or container. With this needle and this bark, you can actually just push it right through. You don't even need the awl, but not everyone has one of these sail making needles. So I'll show you how to use the awl. Another technique, if you want it to work really well, is to take your awl and heat it and then kind of burn into it, which makes a much less opportunity for that to pull out when you put the string. Does that make sense? Tighten your pieces. You might cut the rim a little bit, get it even. Lash it up on this side. Now I lash these right together. Another option is to overlap it a little bit, like here. Okay, to overlap it. Put a string on. Maybe a rim if you really want to. This one I put a rim and an outside and inside rim on it. Kind of stiffens it up and finishes it off. And off you go.